Chapter 1. The Night Everything Changed. June 14, 1943. For 3 long years, the German occupation has smothered France. The swastika hangs from city halls and church towers alike. Radios are confiscated. Curfews choke the towns. Every whisper might belong to an informant. Across the countryside, farms that once fed families now feed an empire. But beneath the soil, another kind of harvest is beginning, one sown in secrecy, watered by courage, and hidden from the Gestapo's gaze. This is the story of the Maquis of Saint-Clair, ordinary villagers who refused to bow. Men and women who turned pitchforks into weapons and barns into armories. History would call them saboteurs. They called themselves farmers. The rain fell in sheets that night, whispering across the fields of Saint-Clair. The earth was heavy, soaked and silent beneath a pale moon. A single lantern flickered in the distance, then disappeared. In the wheat, shadows moved, slow, careful, deliberate. Pierre Leclerc pressed his body to the cold ground, his breath fogging in the night. He could hear the hum of the rails, the iron heartbeat of a German supply train approaching from the east. Behind him, 4 others crouched low, men who, until this war, had known only soil, seed, and sun. Luke wiped mud from his brow and whispered, 3 minutes. Pierre nodded. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what they were about to do. They were farmers. Sons of the earth. None had worn a uniform. None had been trained to kill. Yet here they were, crawling through the dark, clutching the crude explosives they built from fertilizer and desperation. The tracks quivered. The sound grew, deep, rhythmic, unrelenting. Pierre's mind flashed to his wife and their daughter asleep in the small farmhouse across the valley. He kissed them goodbye as if leaving for work, pretending that tomorrow would come as every day before it had. But tonight was different. Tonight, the plow had become a weapon. Luke gave the signal, a soft whistle. Pierre planted the charge beneath the central rail, twisting the wire around a rusted bolt, praying the wet soil wouldn't ruin the fuse. Behind them, Etienne, barely 17, clutched the detonator with white knuckles. His lips moved silently, repeating the same words over and over. A prayer or a promise. The train appeared, a black serpent cutting through the storm, its whistle tearing the silence apart. Inside its carriages, ammunition, weapons, and soldiers bound for the Atlantic wall. Pierre pressed his face into the mud, heart pounding in his ears. The wheels screamed past. Then, a flash, a roar, the sky split open. Fire consumed the valley. The blast echoed across the hills, lighting the wheat like daybreak. Metal twisted, rails snapped, soldiers shouted in confusion. Pierre looked up, his face wet with rain and ash. For a brief moment, he saw Luke's eyes in the orange glow, fear and triumph intertwined. They'd done it. He turned and whispered into the storm. Go. Now. They vanished into the darkness, swallowed by the fields that had raised them. As the flames devoured the train behind them, the narrator's voice cuts through. They were farmers by day, saboteurs by night. Ordinary hands that dared to wound an empire. Fade to black. Chapter 2. Life Under the Boot. When the smoke cleared that night, Saint-Clair slept uneasily. The villagers awoke to distant echoes, not knowing what had happened, only that something had changed. The Germans arrived by sunrise, trucks, searchlights, dogs. They combed the hills and fields, shouting orders in a language that still felt foreign and cruel. For most in Saint-Clair, survival meant silence. You worked, you bowed, you obeyed. And yet, behind every quiet nod and every polite "Jar" lived a silent rebellion. The occupation had become a second skin, unwanted, suffocating, impossible to remove. Rations grew smaller. Radios were banned. Curfews turned the night into a prison. The church bells still rang, but even God seemed to whisper now. Pierre Leclerc knew this life well. Before the war, he'd been a farmer like his father and grandfather before him, wheat, potatoes, a few chickens. Now, the fields were watched by German patrols. His best tools had been seized. For the Reich? His home, once a place of laughter and wine, was now shadowed by fear. Each evening, Pierre returned to his barn, pretending to tend his livestock. Beneath a pile of hay, hidden beneath old sacks and dust, sat a small radio transmitter. Its battery hummed faintly, a heartbeat of defiance. He'd learned to work it from a man in Lyon, one of the last to escape before the Gestapo closed the network. Every message was short, coded, and sent in the dead of night. Train derailed east of Caen. Local resistance unharmed. Enemy convoy rerouted through Rouen. Morale strong. Supplies low. Each word risked his life. Each signal, a spark in the dark. Marie Dupont taught at the village school. She'd once dreamed of writing novels. Now her stories came in whispers. Her classroom, with its cracked windows and broken desks, became a place of quiet resistance. Messages hidden between arithmetic problems, coded letters passed in children's homework. The Germans thought of her as harmless, a teacher, nothing more. They were wrong. Luc Fournier worked for the railways, memorizing German timetables and routes. He'd once taken pride in his punctuality. Now, he took pride in the trains that never arrived. Every bolt he loosened, every line he, accidentally, misaligned, delayed the Reich just a little longer. And Father Henri, the old priest of Saint-Clair, who still preached peace even as war devoured Europe. In the candlelight of confession, he forged new baptism records, Jewish names reborn with French ones. Each false certificate was a life pulled back from the brink. By day, they looked like ordinary souls. A farmer, a teacher, a railway worker, a priest. By night, they became something else, threads in a web of defiance. The villagers whispered that God had forgotten them. But in the barns, in the classrooms, in the echo of the church bells, resistance breathed. It was quiet, patient, and stubborn, like the people themselves. Still, the fear was constant. Gestapo agents had begun to appear more often in nearby towns, black coats, polished boots, eyes that saw through lies. Those who spoke too loudly disappeared. Those who listened too closely followed soon after. Yet for all the fear, Saint-Clair endured. The Germans thought them docile, simple, broken. But even a farmer knows, soil turned over long enough will yield new life. And in Saint-Clair, something was growing that no occupation could crush. Pierre stood one evening on the edge of his fields, watching the sun dip below the horizon. He could see the faint glow of the German outposts down the road, their flag hanging limp in the still air. He clenched his hands in his pockets, feeling the rough edge of a folded message inside. Tomorrow, he would send it. Tomorrow, the world would hear them again. In the distance, the church bell rang once, twice, a sound as familiar as his own heartbeat. And for the first time in months, Pierre allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were not alone. Chapter 3: Seeds of Defiance. It began with whispers, and with paint. One night, long after curfew, Luc crept into town with a tin of red paint stolen from the rail yard. By dawn, the walls of Saint-Clair bore a new message, crude but defiant, a bright red V for Victoire. The villagers awoke to find it glistening in the morning light. For the first time in months, they smiled. The Germans were furious. They scrubbed the walls, barked orders, questioned the locals. But that night the V returned, larger, bolder, on the door of the commandant's office. The symbol spread to barns, lampposts, even the church gate. It became a message written not in ink, but in courage. Pierre watched it all from his fields. He had not ordered it, but he understood it. Every V was a heartbeat, every act of defiance a breath of freedom. The soil of Saint-Clair was changing. Soon, their work grew bolder. Luc began leaving false rail instructions to misdirect German trains. One crate of ammunition lost here, one troop transport delayed there. Marie's pupils carried messages disguised as school essays. Father Henri stored ration cards and stolen documents beneath the altar. Each night, Pierre's radio whispered to life beneath the hay. He would sit in silence as the static cleared, waiting for a voice from London. Saint-Clair, this is Seagull Base. Acknowledged. Message received. Each confirmation was a miracle. For a few seconds, the invisible world beyond the occupation reached back, and he felt seeing. But even miracles attract danger. One evening, while Pierre adjusted the antenna, his daughter ran into the barn, breathless. "Papa," she whispered. "The soldiers, they're here." Outside, the sound of boots in the mud. Voices speaking German. Pierre's pulse quickened. He yanked the battery from the radio, tossed it beneath the hay, and reached for his pitchfork. The barn doors swung open. 2 German officers stood in the doorway, one young, arrogant, the other silent, watchful. They looked around, sniffing the air. "Leclerc," one said. "We search. Routine inspection." Pierre forced a smile. "Of course, Herr Officer. You'll find nothing here but mud and manure." They stepped inside, boots thudding against the floorboards. One of them ran his gloved fingers across the workbench. Another kicked at a sack of grain. Pierre felt sweat bead at his neck. Beneath the hay, inches away, lay the radio, its metal edge barely concealed. The officer's eyes lingered on it for a moment. He reached down, brushing the hay aside. Then, a sudden noise from outside. A shout, a woman's voice. Marie had appeared at the gate, calling, "Pierre! The cow's broken the fence again." The officer turned, irritated. "Deal with it later," he barked. But Pierre seized the moment. "Please, Herr Officer, she's frightened. The animal will damage the fields." The younger German rolled his eyes. "Fine. Go." Pierre hurried past them, stepping into the night air. He exhaled shakily. Marie met his eyes, saying nothing. She didn't need to. She had just saved them all. When the soldiers finally left, the radio remained untouched. Pierre leaned against the barn door, trembling. The world had nearly ended that night, quietly, in a pile of hay. Still, their work continued. Over the next weeks, the resistance of Saint-Clair grew in both courage and conviction. They sabotaged German supply carts by replacing fuel with water. They slit tires, cut phone lines, stole maps. And every victory, no matter how small, rippled outward, through villages and valleys, through rumor and hope. Luke once said, "Each time they replace a wire, we remind them this is not their land." Pierre nodded. "Then we'll keep reminding them until they believe it." By summer, the Germans had grown restless. There were reports of sabotage from across the region, a network the occupiers couldn't trace. But the villagers of Saint-Clair knew, every message sent, every train delayed, every painted V, it all began here, in the fields beneath their feet. Late one night, Pierre switched on the radio again. The static cleared, and a faint voice came through. "Saint-Clair, this is Seagull Base. Operation approved. Await instructions." Pierre leaned close, whispering, "London, this is Saint-Clair. We are still alive." For a long moment, the line went silent. Then a voice, soft, distant, replied, "And we hear you." He turned off the radio and stared into the dark. The occupation still ruled the land. The Gestapo still hunted. But Saint-Clair had found something stronger than fear, purpose. And purpose, once planted, grows even in the darkest soil. Chapter 4. The Network Expands. By the spring of 1944, the resistance of Saint-Clair had grown beyond anything Pierre could have imagined. What began as a handful of neighbors sharing whispers and paint had become a living network, one that reached beyond their village, into forests, hills, and cities they'd never seen. Every week, new faces arrived quietly at night, messengers, deserters, refugees. Some carried food, some carried bullets, some carried only stories. Pierre and his group welcomed them all. For each person who joined, another secret was born. Among them was Etienne Moreau, just 17 years old, with a crooked grin and legs built for cycling. His family had fled Rouen after a bombing raid, and he now carried messages between villages hidden in the folds of his jacket. Where trucks and radios failed, the boy on his bicycle never did. The Germans rarely noticed him. Just another boy on a battered bike, pedaling through the rain. but inside his satchel were coded notes, written by Marie, destined for the hands of another resistance cell 30 kilometers away. His courage became legend. He rode through checkpoints, through storms, even once past a Gestapo patrol, heart pounding, his face calm. Each letter delivered meant another life saved, another attack coordinated. The Maquis, the larger resistance force across France, had begun to take notice. Saint-Clair was small, but its silence was deceptive. From London to Lyon, whispers spoke of the farmers who fooled the Gestapo. Pierre didn't believe in legends. He believed in timing, patience, and trust. Still, when a coded message came over the radio one night, his hands trembled as he copied it down. Supplies inbound. Airdrop scheduled. Prepare beacon. The British were coming. On the night of the drop, the air was thick with fog. Pierre and Luc dragged barrels of fuel into the fields, arranging them in a precise T shape. Marie stood by the radio, listening for the prearranged phrase. The fields sleep beneath the moon. When it came, her voice caught in her throat. They're here. Moments later, the distant hum of aircraft rippled through the clouds. The villagers watched as the parachutes appeared, ghostly shapes drifting down, carrying crates of supplies and weapons. They ran across the fields, cutting cords, hiding the crates beneath hay bales before dawn. For the first time, the resistance of Saint-Clair was armed with more than hope. But with power came new peril. A failed airdrop 2 villages away had led to an ambush. The Gestapo now knew the countryside was alive with rebellion. They began sweeping through towns, questioning, threatening, executing. Pierre gathered his group in the barn that night. The lamplight flickered on their faces. He looked at each of them, Marie, Luc, Father Henri, and Etienne. The Germans will come, he said quietly. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. But they will come. If you're afraid, leave tonight. No one will blame you. No one moved. Luc spoke first. You've seen the men they hang in the square, Pierre. The ones who begged for mercy. If we stop now, their deaths mean nothing. Marie nodded. We've gone too far to hide. Father Henri crossed himself. Then God help us all. The air was still for a moment, heavy, but resolute. Then Pierre opened the crate that had fallen from the sky. Inside, rifles, detonators, maps. The tools of war in the hands of those who had never asked to wage one. The following weeks blurred together, messages, sabotage, near misses. Etienne's routes became longer, riskier. He rode from dawn till dusk, memorizing paths through woods and fields, never stopping long enough to be caught. Sometimes he saw German patrols, their dogs sniffing through ditches. Sometimes he didn't see them, and that was worse. Marie's students continued their quiet work, still unaware of the full danger their teacher faced. She would smile by day, then stay up through the night coding transmissions. Sleep was a luxury none of them could afford anymore. And Pierre, he'd become both farmer and commander, father and soldier. Each morning he worked his fields under the gaze of German guards, pretending to be broken. Each night, he planned new acts of defiance with hands calloused from labor and resistance alike. Then, one morning, the rumor spread, the Gestapo was on the move. 3 black cars had been seen on the main road to Saint-Clair. Word was they were led by a man named Oberst Klaus Reinhardt, cold, meticulous, and patient. Pierre said nothing, but his jaw tightened. He knew what that meant. When the Gestapo came, they never left empty-handed. That evening, he met with Etienne at the crossroads just beyond the village. The boy's bicycle leaned against a tree, its tires caked with mud. Pierre handed him a letter sealed with wax. Take this to Rouen, Pierre said. Give it to the man at the café on Rue Verte. No one else. Etienne nodded. If I'm stopped? Pierre hesitated. You won't be. The boy smiled faintly. You always say that. He rode off into the night, his small frame swallowed by darkness. Pierre watched him disappear and whispered a prayer he didn't believe in. Because somewhere beyond those hills, the Gestapo's engines were already starting. The storm was coming to Saint-Clair. Chapter 5, The Net Tightens. The morning they arrived, Saint-Clair held its breath. The sound came first, the distant growl of engines, the crunch of gravel beneath heavy tires. Then, through the mist, 3 black cars appeared on the main road, crawling toward the village like beetles in formation. Each carried a mark that had come to symbolize terror, the sigil of the Gestapo. Oberst Klaus Reinhardt stepped out first. Tall, immaculate, his uniform pressed to perfection. His expression was calm, almost gentle, and somehow that made him more frightening. He spoke softly to his men, in a voice that carried farther than any shout. Within minutes, soldiers were knocking on doors, setting up checkpoints, and ordering villagers into the square. Pierre watched from his barn, hidden behind a crack in the wood. He'd known this day would come, but knowing didn't make it easier. Marie's face was pale when she arrived. "They're searching the school," she whispered. "They took the headmaster." Luke entered moments later, his clothes soaked with sweat. "The rail yard's under guard. They're checking everyone. Even the children." Pierre said nothing for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "We stop everything. For now. No messages. No movement." But the order came too late. By nightfall, Etienne had not returned. His bicycle was found abandoned near the riverbank, one tire slashed. For hours, the group searched the woods, calling his name, but only the wind answered. Then, the next morning, a German truck passed through the village carrying prisoners. Pierre saw him, Etienne, bound, bloodied, eyes downcast, in the back. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He just watched as the truck drove away, its taillights fading like dying stars. In the church that evening, the resistance met in silence. No one spoke for several minutes. It was Father Henri who finally broke it. "We must pray for him." Marie's voice trembled. "Prayer won't bring him back." Pierre looked up. "No. But maybe revenge will." That night, he wrote a message to London. "Network compromised. Possible arrests. Request extraction or orders. Saint-Clair will not break." When he finished sending it, he turned off the radio and sat in the dark. For the first time, he wondered if their courage had become their death sentence. Days passed. The Gestapo spread through Saint-Clair like a disease. They searched homes, seized radios, interrogated villagers. No one was safe. Oberst Reinhardt watched everything with quiet fascination. He questioned each suspect himself, never raising his voice, never losing his patience. His method was simple. He didn't threaten, he suggested. He offered safety, food, protection, in exchange for names. And slowly, the fear began to work. By the end of the week, 3 villagers had vanished, men who had once attended Father Henry's sermons. Another, a baker, was found hanging in his shop. The sign read "For treason." The message was clear. Marie stopped teaching. Luke stopped going to the rail yard. Pierre barely left his farm. They became ghosts in their own land. Then, one night, a knock at the rectory door. Father Henri answered, expecting a villager. Instead, 2 German officers stepped inside. They found forged baptism records hidden beneath his desk. He was taken away before dawn. The next morning, the church bells rang, not for service, but for fear. Marie wept quietly in her kitchen, her hands trembling as she held a teacup that wouldn't stop shaking. Luke smashed his radio equipment and buried the parts behind his house. And Pierre, staring out across his empty fields, realized the resistance had reached its breaking point. That evening, they met one final time. In Pierre's barn, the last light of sunset filtered through the slats. Luke spoke first. "It's over, Pierre. We've lost too many. Henry's gone. Etienne's gone. We can't win this." Pierre said nothing. He simply stared at the dirt floor, his mind turning. Finally, he looked up. "If we stop now, the war wins here, before it ends anywhere else." Marie looked at him, tears streaking her face. "And if we don't stop, we die." Pierre's voice hardened. "Then we die on our feet." Silence followed. Outside, the wind moved through the wheat, soft and unbroken. When Pierre finally spoke again, his tone had changed. There's one last convoy. A munitions train headed to Normandy. If we destroy it, it could delay their supply lines for weeks. Henri and Etienne deserve that much. Luc shook his head. You're mad. The Gestapo is everywhere. Pierre met his eyes. Then let them watch. For a moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, Marie nodded. If this is to be our last act, then let it mean something. Pierre extended his hand. One by one, they placed theirs atop his. They no longer spoke of victory or freedom. They spoke only of duty, to each other, to the fallen, to the idea that even the smallest village could defy an empire. Outside, the black cars idled in the square. Reinhardt watched the horizon as the sun disappeared, unaware that the people he hunted were already preparing their final strike. The net was closing. But inside it, the trap had grown teeth. Chapter 6: The Final Operation. It was raining again. The kind of cold, endless rain that turns roads to rivers and fields to swamps. The perfect cover for ghosts. Pierre stood in the doorway of his barn, tightening the straps on his satchel. Inside were detonators, wire, and enough explosives to send the munitions convoy into the sky. He looked at Marie, who sat by the lantern, loading a pistol she'd never fired before. Are you sure? She asked quietly. Pierre smiled faintly. You asked me that 2 years ago, when we hid the radio. Marie nodded. And you said yes then, too? Luc entered, dripping wet, his hands black with grease. The charges are ready. The bridge is weak. We'll only need one good spark. Pierre nodded. Then let's finish it. They left Saint-Clair under the cover of darkness, 3 figures moving through the rain-soaked countryside like shadows. Behind them, the village slept. No one would know what they had done until morning, if there was a morning. The convoy was due to pass just after midnight, 6 trucks of ammunition, guarded by 2 armored cars. Their target was the stone bridge that spanned the ravine south of the village. If the bridge fell, so would the convoy. Luc and Pierre worked quickly, planting the explosives beneath the support beams. Each breath felt louder than thunder. Marie stood watch at the road above, disguised as a stranded traveler. In her satchel, a map, a flask of brandy, and one final note for Pierre, should she not return. The rain came harder. The detonators sparked with moisture. Pierre wiped his hands, muttering under his breath. Come on, hold, just a little longer. Then, headlights in the distance. The sound of engines. The convoy. Marie stepped into the road, waving her arms, shouting in German. Bit! Hilf! My car, it's broken! The lead truck slowed. The commander leaned out, suspicious. She smiled nervously, pretending to stumble. Behind her, down in the ravine, Pierre's hands hovered over the detonator. Luc's whisper came through the rain. Wait until the last truck's on the bridge. Then light it. The convoy rolled forward, engines roaring. Soldiers shouted, confused by the storm. One truck after another crossed the bridge. Pierre's heart pounded. 4, 5, 6. Then, a shout. A flashlight beam swept the ravine. German voices barked orders. They'd been seen. Luc's eyes went wide. Pierre! Pierre didn't hesitate. He slammed the plunger down. The world exploded. A wave of fire and rock tore through the night, hurling steel and men into the air. The bridge shattered, its stone arch collapsing into the chasm below. The roar echoed across the valley, louder than any church bell, brighter than any sunrise. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The rain hissed on burning wreckage. Then came the screams, the chaos, the thunder of crumbling stone. Marie fell to the ground, shielding her head as debris rained around her. Luc shouted Pierre's name through the smoke. There was no answer. He climbed the ravine, stumbling through mud and flame. Pierre lay near the edge, blood on his temple, eyes half open. Luc knelt beside him. You did it, he said. You bloody did it. Pierre smiled faintly, his breath shallow. Tell them it was the farmers. His hand fell limp. Luke sat there in the rain, surrounded by the wreckage of the bridge, the bodies of soldiers, and the burning remains of the convoy. Somewhere above, Marie stood trembling on the road, staring at the inferno that had once been the enemy's path to Normandy. She whispered a prayer, not for victory, but for peace, a peace she could barely imagine anymore. By dawn, the fire had burned out. Smoke curled into the sky like a signal to the heavens. Saint-Clair was quiet again, though nothing about it was the same. Luke returned alone, soaked and silent. He buried Pierre at the edge of his fields, where the wheat met the river. There was no ceremony, no priest, only a wooden cross made from 2 fence posts and a single carved word, resistant. When the villagers awoke, they saw the plume of smoke rising from the south. The rumors began before noon. The bridge was gone, the Germans furious, the convoy lost. They didn't know who had done it. They only knew someone had. Marie walked to the church and lit a single candle beneath the altar. Its flame flickered in the draught, small but defiant. She whispered, "For Pierre. For Etienne. For all of us." By that evening, the Gestapo had sealed off the roads and begun their reprisals. They searched every home, interrogated every man. But no one spoke. No one betrayed the farmers of Saint-Clair. In the end, Reinhardt left the village in silence. His convoy was gone, his pride shattered. He'd won every battle, until this one. As the cars disappeared over the horizon, Marie stood at the edge of the fields, the wind lifting her hair. The land was scarred, burned, broken, but free. And in that silence she heard Pierre's voice again, faint but steady. "They'll never understand. We didn't fight because we hated them. We fought because this is our home." Chapter 7. Aftermath and Liberation. For weeks after the explosion, Saint-Clair lived in a fog of fear and grief. The Gestapo raided every home, tore up floorboards, burned barns, interrogated families. They found nothing. Pierre's name was whispered, never spoken aloud. To the villagers he was gone, but not dead. He'd become a story, one that traveled farther than any of them would ever see. Luke hid in the woods outside the village, surviving on what little food Marie could bring him. He watched as German patrols passed by, searching, shouting, growing more desperate each day. They didn't know that their own failure had already sealed their fate. Because beyond the horizon, the Allies were moving. In early June, the first distant sounds of artillery rolled across the countryside. The invasion had begun. One morning, Marie awoke to silence, a silence that felt different. No engines. No shouts. No boots in the streets. She stepped outside and saw smoke rising in the distance, not from destruction, but from battle far away. And then she heard it. The sound of unfamiliar engines, rougher, deeper. Trucks, not German but Allied, rumbling up the road from the west. Soldiers with unfamiliar accents, waving to the villagers. The liberation of Saint-Clair had come at last. People poured into the streets, waving tattered flags, some sewn from bedsheets, others painted by hand. Tears, laughter, disbelief, emotions that had been buried for 4 years finally found their voice. Marie stood at the edge of the square, watching as British soldiers dismounted and spoke with the villagers. They'd come to restore order, but found something stronger, hope. An officer approached her, tipping his cap. "Ma'am, we've heard about this place," he said. "About what you did here." Marie shook her head. "We did what we had to." Later that afternoon, she walked down to Pierre's farm. The fields were quiet, golden under the summer sun. The wheat had grown tall again, swaying gently in the breeze. At the edge of the river stood the small wooden cross Luke had made. Marie knelt beside it, brushing dirt from the carved letters. She spoke softly, her words carried by the wind. "They say the bridge is still gone. That it set back the German front for weeks. You'd have smiled to hear that, Pierre. You'd have said, it's not the bridge that matters, it's the message. Well, the message was heard. London knows your name. The world will, too." She stood, tears glinting in the sunlight. Behind her, Luke approached, older now, thinner, but alive. "They're gone," he said quietly. The Germans. All of them. Marie nodded. Then it's over. Luke looked out at the fields. No. Not over. Just quieter. They stood in silence for a long time, listening to the rustle of the wheat, the sound of life returning. When they finally turned to leave, Marie paused at the door of the farmhouse. On the table lay Pierre's old notebook, the one he'd used to record transmissions. She opened it, reading the final line he'd written before the last mission. If we fall, let them know we were not soldiers. We were farmers. We fought not for glory, but for tomorrow. She closed the book and smiled through her tears. Tomorrow, she whispered. You were right. That evening, the sun dipped below the hills, painting Saint-Clair in gold. Children ran through the streets again. The church bells rang freely for the first time in years. And as the sound echoed across the valley, Marie lit a single candle in the window of Pierre's farmhouse. Its glow flickered softly against the dark, a quiet signal to anyone still watching that Saint-Clair still stood. The narrator's voice returns one final time. History will count its battles and its generals. It will mark the dates of invasions and the names of empires. But freedom was bought by hands that tilled fields, not by those that commanded armies. In the heart of occupied France, ordinary people dared to fight back. Not with strength, but with faith. They were farmers by day, saboteurs by night. And they fooled the Gestapo. Pause. This has been the Resistance Files, stories of courage, defiance, and the human spirit. Fade out.